November 25, 1943. 1:56 in the morning. Off Cape St. George, Solomon Islands. 5 American destroyers slice through pitch-black water at 31 knots. On the bridge of USS Charles Osborne, a 42-year-old captain named Arley Burke stares at his radar screen. 5 Japanese destroyers, 5,800 yards ahead. His squadron has been hunting them for 90 minutes through total darkness. The Japanese are running. Burke orders his ships to turn right directly toward the enemy. At this range, torpedoes cannot miss. Neither can theirs. In 60 seconds, both sides will fire. But Burke does something the Japanese never expect. He holds fire. He waits. 10 more seconds. 5 more seconds. At 4,500 yards, he gives the order. 15 torpedoes leap into the darkness. The Japanese fire back 18 torpedoes screaming through the black water. Burke is already turning. Their torpedoes miss by 50 yards, exploding harmlessly in his wake. His don't miss. The destroyer Onami erupts in flames. Then Makinami. 2 enemy ships destroyed in 4 minutes. By dawn, 3 Japanese destroyers will rest at the bottom of the Pacific. 900 enemy sailors gone. Burke's squadron 0 casualties, 0 damage, 0 hits taken. Admiral William Halsey will call it an almost perfect surface action. But the statistics say this should never have happened. In 2 years of night surface battles, American destroyers had been losing 60% of engagements against the Japanese. The enemy had better torpedoes, better night optics, better tactics. They had been winning these fights since Pearl Harbor. So how did a farm boy from Boulder, Colorado, a man whose grandfather was a Swedish immigrant, a man who graduated 71st in his Naval Academy class, a man who spent 22 years being told his ideas were insane, sink 3 Japanese destroyers in 32 minutes without losing a single sailor? Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next gripping episodes. Join us as we uncover more incredible stories, historical events, and inspiring moments from the past. Be part of our community of history lovers, because for 22 years, every time the United States Navy told Arley Burke to do something one way, he found a better way. And then he proved it worked. The man they nicknamed 31-knot Burke was about to do 3 impossible things in the next 90 minutes. And by sunrise, the Japanese High Command would issue an unprecedented order, an order that admitted in writing that they could no longer fight American destroyers at night. This is how it happened. And to understand what Burke did at Cape St. George, you have to understand how badly the United States Navy was being humiliated in the Solomon Islands. From August 1942 through October 1943, the waters around Guadalcanal earned a terrifying nickname among American sailors. They called it Iron Bottom Sound. Because that's what the seafloor looked like, a graveyard of American steel. The Japanese had a weapon the Americans didn't fully understand yet. The Type 93 torpedo. The Americans would later call it the Long Lance. It traveled at 50 knots. It carried a 1,080-pound warhead. It had a range of 22,000 yards. And it left almost no wake because it ran on pure oxygen instead of compressed air. American torpedoes. Half of them didn't even explode. The Mark 15 torpedo had a defective magnetic detonator that failed under combat conditions. American sailors were firing weapons that bounced off enemy hulls. Meanwhile, Japanese destroyers were obliterating American cruisers from distances the Americans didn't believe were possible. The body count was horrifying. At the Battle of Savo Island in August 1942, 4 Allied cruisers were sunk in 32 minutes. 1,077 sailors killed. At Tassafaronga in November 1942, 8 American cruisers and 4 destroyers attacked 8 Japanese destroyers. The Americans lost. 1 cruiser sunk, 3 crippled, 400 dead. The Japanese 1 destroyer lost. They escaped into the night before the Americans could even reload their guns. Then the pattern was always the same. The Japanese would detect American ships first using superior night optics. They would launch their long lance torpedoes from beyond visual range. American ships would explode in the darkness without ever seeing what hit them. Then, Japanese gunfire would finish the survivors. By mid-1943, American destroyer commanders were terrified of night surface combat. The official tactics manual told them to stay in tight formation, follow the flagship fire only on command. Those tactics were getting them killed. Every officer in the Pacific Fleet knew it. Nobody knew how to fix it. The Navy tried everything. Better radar, the Japanese still detected ships first. New torpedo procedures, the torpedoes still malfunctioned. More training. But trained how? Training based on doctrine that wasn't working. By October 1943, Vice Admiral William Halsey was desperate. The Marines were landing on Bougainville. Japanese destroyers were running supplies and reinforcements through the Solomons every night. Halsey needed someone who could break the cycle. Someone who didn't think like the manual. Someone who could turn American destroyers from prey into predators. But everything was about to change because of one man nobody was paying attention to. His name was Arley Albert Burke, born October 19, 1901 on a farm 3 miles outside Boulder, Colorado. His grandfather was a Swedish immigrant named Anders Peter Björkegren, who changed his name to Burke when he came to America. Young Arley grew up working on that farm, and he learned something there that most officers never learn. If a piece of machinery broke down, you didn't wait for someone else to fix it. You took it apart yourself. You figured out how it actually worked, not how the instruction book said it worked. Then you put it back together better than before. He was the kid who disassembled the tractor engine just to see what was inside. He was the kid who understood that every system has a weakness, and every weakness can be exploited if you study it long enough. When Burke graduated from the Naval Academy in 1923, he ranked 71st out of 413 midshipmen. Not brilliant, not a prodigy, just relentlessly determined. On graduation day, he married Roberta Gorsuch of Washington, D.C. He told her he planned to make the Navy his career. She told him he had better be good at it. He intended to be. Most young officers picked easy specialties, navigation, communications, anything with a clear career path. Burke chose ordnance engineering, the most technically demanding, mathematically punishing field in the entire Navy. Explosives, propellants, gun mechanisms, fire control systems. The Navy sent him to the University of Michigan for a master's degree in chemical engineering. He graduated in 1929 as one of only 46 officers in the entire Navy qualified as an ordnance design specialist. He spent 3 years at the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington. Officers twice his age would bring him problems they had been wrestling with for months. Burke would take the blueprints home, study them overnight, and return the next morning with solutions so obvious that everyone wondered why they hadn't seen it themselves. He had a gift for spotting the one variable everyone else missed. In 1939, Burke took command of the destroyer USS Mugford. She was a tired ship with a tired crew that expected an easy assignment. Burke had other plans. Within 6 months, Mugford won the fleet gunnery competition, beating modern destroyers with twice her firepower. How Burke trained his gun crews to reload faster. He redesigned the ammunition handling procedures. He timed every single movement with a stopwatch, eliminated wasted motion, drilled his sailors until they could fire, reload, and fire again in 40% less time than regulations specified. When inspectors arrived demanding to see how he did it, Burke handed them stopwatches and told them to time it themselves. They did. Mugford's crew broke their own records during the inspection. Then the war came. And they didn't know it yet, but the decision Burke made next would save thousands of American lives. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Arley Burke was stuck behind a desk in Washington. He wanted command. He wanted combat. The Navy wanted his brain in the Bureau of Ordnance, fixing the broken weapons that were killing sailors in the Pacific. For 18 months, Burke worked 16-hour days redesigning gun mounts, improving ammunition, solving the problems that doctrine couldn't solve. He hated every minute of it. He wrote repeated requests for sea duty. The Bureau kept denying them. They needed him too badly. By mid-1942, Burke was a 40-year-old commander with the best ordnance reputation in the Navy and zero combat experience. If he didn't get to sea soon, the entire war would pass him by. In June 1942, his transfer finally came through. He was sent to the South Pacific, but not as a destroyer captain, as a staff officer. Burke was furious. But he went. He worked. He waited. In February 1943, his moment finally arrived. He was given command of Destroyer Division 43. 4 destroyers in the Solomon Islands. His first patrol mission was supposed to be routine escort supply ships, sail in formation, follow the book. Burke looked at the standard patrol patterns and immediately saw the problem. They were predictable. Any competent submarine commander could set up an ambush. So Burke threw out the patrol pattern. He varied speed, varied course, varied timing. His destroyers zigzagged unpredictably, forcing enemy submarines to guess. In 3 months, his division encountered 7 enemy submarines, sank 2, lost 0 ships. The Navy noticed. On October 23, 1943, Halsey promoted Burke to command Destroyer Squadron 23. The Little Beavers. 5 destroyers with a brutal reputation, they had been in continuous combat for 6 months, fought in 8 major engagements, and lost ships. Morale was shaky. Burke arrived. He didn't give speeches. He rewrote the tactical manual. What he proposed was considered insane by every other destroyer commander in the Pacific. Standard Navy doctrine said destroyers must stay in tight line formation, follow the flagship, maintain rigid formation discipline, fire only on command. These were the rules that had kept American sailors alive, sort of, for 2 years. Burke threw them in the trash. He trained his squadron to operate as 5 independent hunters working together. Each captain would have authority to maneuver independently as long as they stayed coordinated. Burke drilled them on one simple principle that the manual specifically forbade. When you have radar contact, close fast. Fire first. Keep moving. Don't wait for orders. Don't hesitate. Speed and aggression win night battles. The other squadron commanders thought Burke was suicidal. His own captains weren't sure either. Splitting your formation in a night battle was supposed to be the fastest way to kill yourself. Friendly fire incidents, collisions, scattered ships getting picked off one by one. Burke's response was to drill, drill, and drill again. Every day, he ran tactical exercises, formation changes in total darkness, emergency turns at 30 knots, split-second communications using only signal lights and prearranged codes. By mid-November, his 5 captains could execute complex coordinated maneuvers in pitch blackness without ever using the radio. Burke told them they were ready. They didn't believe him. They were about to find out. November 24, 1943. Afternoon, Purvis Bay, Solomon Islands. Burke received word that USS Spence had a major problem. A boiler tube was clogged. The repair would take hours. Without full power, Spence could only make 30 knots. Burke's other 4 destroyers could make 33 to 34 knots. This was a disaster. Intelligence reports indicated a Japanese convoy was heading south that night, 5 destroyers evacuating troops from Buka. Halsey wanted them intercepted. If Burke waited for Spence to finish repairs, he would miss the intercept window. If he left Spence behind, he lost 20% of his firepower. Standard procedure, said report the delay. Wait. Sail at full strength tomorrow. Burke didn't do standard procedure. He calculated. The Japanese destroyers would be loaded with troops and supplies, probably 32 knots maximum. If Burke pushed his entire squadron to exactly 31 knots, he could catch them with all 5 ships intact. It was a brutal risk. 31 knots for 6 straight hours would strain every boiler in the squadron. One mechanical failure and a destroyer would fall behind in enemy waters. But Burke decided 5 ships at 31 knots beat 4 ships at 34 knots. At 3 p.m. with Spence barely operational, Burke signaled Halsey, proceeding at 31 knots. Halsey's staff thought it was a joke. They replied sarcastically, "Good luck, 31-knot Burke." The nickname would stick forever. At 6 p.m., Burke's squadron steamed north into the darkness. 5 destroyers in column: Charles Osborne, the flagship, Claxton, Dyson, Converse, and the wounded Spence. The ocean was flat calm, no moon, visibility near zero. The Japanese convoy was supposed to pass Cape St. George around midnight. If intelligence was wrong, if the Japanese changed course, if they were delayed by even an hour, Burke would burn thousands of gallons of fuel, exhaust his crews, and accomplish absolutely nothing. He didn't care. He was betting everything on being in the exact right place at the exact right time. At 31 knots, his squadron carved through the darkness. Boilers roaring. Every man at battle stations. Radar operators scanning continuously. The hours crawled by. 11:45 p.m. Radar contact. Range 22,000 yards. 5 ships bearing north. Speed 30 knots. It was them. Burke didn't announce it over the radio. He just calmly increased speed to 32 knots, straining Spence's wounded boiler past its limits. His plan was elegant in its simplicity: close to torpedo range, silently fire everything escape before the Japanese could even react. But there was a complication. The Japanese were zigzagging, changing course every few minutes to evade submarines. Burke had to predict their movements perfectly. Position his squadron for a clean shot. Guess wrong, and the Japanese would detect him first. They would launch their long lance torpedoes. His entire squadron would die in darkness, and nobody would know what happened until sunrise revealed the wreckage on the bottom of the sea. Burke studied the radar plot for 90 minutes. He saw the pattern. The Japanese were zigzagging on a predictable cycle, 3 minutes on each leg. He calculated their next turn, adjusted his course, then again and again. For 90 minutes, Burke played a lethal game of geometry, matching every Japanese course change, closing the range by hundreds of yards on every cycle undetected. By 1:30 a.m., Burke's squadron was 8,000 yards behind the Japanese, perfectly matched to their course, completely invisible. But success at this moment meant nothing, because Burke was about to make his most dangerous decision of the night. The decision that every doctrine, every manual, every senior officer in the Pacific would have called crazy. He was going to split his squadron in half, in the dark, in the middle of an enemy formation, with long lance torpedoes about to fly in every direction. In Part 2, you'll see exactly how Arley Burke executed the most precise night surface action in American naval history. You'll watch him sink 3 Japanese destroyers in 32 minutes. You'll see the moment Halsey's headquarters realized what their 31-knot joke had actually become. And you'll discover the unprecedented order Japanese High Command issued just 48 hours later, an order that admitted on paper that the Imperial Japanese Navy could no longer fight American destroyers at night. But could one man's insane tactics survive what came next? Could Burke do it again with the entire Japanese fleet hunting him? The answer would change the Pacific War forever. When we left Arley Burke at the end of Part 1, his 5 destroyers were silently stalking 5 Japanese warships through the pitch-black waters off Cape St. George. He had defied doctrine. He had pushed a damaged destroyer to 31 knots for 6 straight hours. He had positioned his squadron 8,000 yards behind the enemy completely undetected. And now he was about to do something every senior officer in the Pacific would have called suicide. He was going to split his squadron in half, in the dark, with long lance torpedoes about to fly in every direction. The statistics said American destroyers lost 60% of night surface engagements. Burke was about to break that statistic forever. But first he had to survive the next 4 minutes. And this is where everything became much worse. Because Burke wasn't just fighting the Japanese that night. He was fighting 2 years of failed American doctrine personally enforced by some of the most powerful admirals in the United States Navy. To understand the institutional war Burke was waging, You have to meet the man who represented everything he was fighting against. Vice Admiral Robert Ike Giffen, Old Navy, battleship admiral. The kind of officer who believed destroyers should stay in line fire on command and never deviate from the manual. Giffen had commanded American forces at the disastrous Battle of Rennell Island in January 1943. He had ignored radar warnings. He had kept his cruisers in rigid formation. The result was the heavy cruiser USS Chicago torpedoed and sunk. Hundreds of sailors dead. Giffen was promoted afterward. This was the Navy. Burke was trying to change. Senior officers who had survived the disasters of 1942 by following doctrine, even when that doctrine got their men killed. They didn't just resist Burke's ideas. They considered his methods a personal insult. And when Burke first proposed his independent maneuvering tactics in early 1943, he was ordered into a conference room aboard a flagship cruiser. 3 senior captains and 1 rear admiral sat across from him. The admiral picked up Burke's tactical proposal and held it like it smelled bad. "Commander Burke, you're suggesting we abandon formation discipline." "No, sir. I'm suggesting we replace rigid formation with coordinated independent action." "That's the same thing." "With respect, sir, it isn't." The admiral leaned forward. "Commander, the Japanese have superior torpedoes, superior optics, superior night training. Our only advantage is formation discipline. You want to throw that away?" "Sir, formation discipline is why we're losing. The Japanese know we won't break formation. They aim their torpedoes at where our line will be. We have to become unpredictable. You'll have collisions, friendly fire, chaos. Not if the captains are trained properly." The admiral closed the folder. "Commander Burke, you will follow doctrine. If I hear one more word about this, you will be relieved of command and reassigned to a desk in San Diego. Are we clear?" Burke said nothing. He saluted. He walked out, and he kept training his captains exactly the way he wanted to, every single day, in secret. Because while these admirals were defending doctrine, American sailors were dying in Iron Bottom Sound at a rate of roughly 200 men per major engagement. But Burke found an unexpected ally, and that ally was about to change everything. His name was William Frederick Halsey, Jr., Bull Halsey, commander of the South Pacific Force, the most aggressive admiral in the United States Navy. A man who famously said his strategy for winning the war was, kill Japs, kill more Japs. Halsey was old school in personality, but radical in tactics. He didn't care about doctrine. He cared about results. And in October 1943, he was hearing whispers about a destroyer commander who was experimenting with new night fighting methods. Halsey called Burke to his headquarters at Noumea. "Commander, I'm hearing things about you. Are you violating doctrine?" "Admiral, I'm interpreting doctrine." Halsey laughed, a loud barking laugh. "Interpreting it, that's a good one. Show me what you've got." Burke spread his tactical diagrams across Halsey's desk. He explained the radar coordination, the independent maneuvering, the aggressive closing tactics. Halsey listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. Then he stood up. "Commander, I'm giving you Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers. They're tired. They've lost ships. You will train them your way. If you succeed, I will personally back you against every battleship admiral in this Navy. If you fail, you will spend the rest of the war counting boots in a warehouse in Pearl Harbor. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "You have 30 days. Burke had one chance, one opportunity to prove that everything the Navy had been doing wrong for 2 years could be fixed by a farm boy from Colorado with a stopwatch and a slide rule. The day of the official test came on November 24, 1943. Except it wasn't really a test. It was a real combat mission, with real Japanese destroyers carrying real soldiers, and if Burke failed, men would die, including possibly every sailor under his command. Halsey's headquarters was monitoring everything by radio. The senior captains who had threatened Burke's career were monitoring too. They were waiting for him to fail. Some of them were hoping he would fail. Because if Burke succeeded, the entire foundation of American destroyer doctrine would have to be rewritten, and their careers, their reputations, their 2 years of insisting the manual was correct would all be exposed as wrong. The pressure was crushing. Burke stood on the bridge of USS Charles Osborne with his radar plot in front of him. His 5 captains were waiting for orders. The Japanese convoy was 8,000 yards away, completely unaware they were being hunted. At 1:45 a.m., the Japanese formation split. 2 destroyers peeled off and headed west, a screening force. 3 destroyers continued north, the troop carriers. Burke had to choose. He could attack all 5 together with his combined force, or he could split his squadron and engage both groups simultaneously. This was the moment. Doctrine said, never split your force in night combat. Burke ignored it. He signaled Captain Henry Armstrong. Converse and Spence would break west and engage the screening destroyers. Burke would take Osborne, Claxton, and Dyson north after the troop carriers. At 1:50 a.m., his squadron divided. 2 ships turned west. 3 ships accelerated north to 33 knots. Range to the Japanese troop carriers, 7,000 yards. Closing fast. At 1:56 a.m., Burke turned his 3 destroyers directly toward the enemy. Range 5,800 yards. Every second cut 50 yards off the distance. 5,000 yards. 4,800. Burke's executive officer leaned over and whispered, "Captain, they're going to see us." Burke said nothing. 4,600 yards. 4,500. Fire torpedoes, all tubes.
Baptista Missouri.
15. Mark 15. Torpedoes launched simultaneously from his 3 destroyers, running at 45 knots. Hot, straight, and normal, the classic American torpedo prayer. The launch flashes lit the night for 3 seconds, long enough. The Japanese saw it. They turned hard and fired their own torpedoes. 18. Long lances screaming through the black water at 50 knots, carrying 1,080-pound warheads each. Burke ordered an emergency turn to starboard. His 3 destroyers wheeled right in perfect unison, a maneuver impossible without months of secret training. They presented their sterns to the incoming torpedoes, minimizing target profile. The Japanese torpedoes raced past, missed by 50 yards, exploded harmlessly in the American wakes. 30 seconds passed. 45 seconds. Then the night erupted. The destroyer. Onami took 3 torpedo hits amidships. She exploded so violently that her bow and stern both pointed skyward before she sank. 11 seconds later, Makinami took 2 hits and broke completely in half. Both sections sank within 90 seconds. The 3rd Japanese destroyer, Yugiri, took 1 hit in the stern. Her rudder jammed. Her engines failed. She was crippled but still afloat. Burke's 3 destroyers closed in at 3,000 yards and switched to guns. His ordnance training paid off in those next 6 minutes. His gun crews reloaded 40% faster than regulation. They fired 5-inch shells with terrifying accuracy. Yugiri burned. She returned fire weakly. By 2:28 a.m., she was a flaming wreck. She slid beneath the waves. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed in 32 minutes. Burke's 3 ships untouched. 10 miles west, Converse and Spence found the screening destroyers and engaged at 2:20 a.m. After a brutal gun battle, Burke's main force raced in to support. 1 Japanese destroyer escaped into a squall. The other was crippled and limped away. By dawn, Burke ordered withdrawal. His squadron entered friendly waters at 6 a.m. 5 ships, 0 casualties, 0 damage. Halsey's response came over the radio. "Well done, 31 knot. Thanksgiving services upon your return." But success in one battle was one thing. Convincing the entire Navy to adopt his methods was another challenge entirely. The after-action reports landed on desks across the Pacific Fleet. The numbers were impossible to argue with. 3 enemy destroyers sunk. 900 Japanese sailors dead. 0 American losses. Halsey personally circulated Burke's tactical methods to every destroyer squadron in the Pacific. But the resistance was immediate. Senior captains, who had trained their crews on traditional doctrine, refused to retrain them. Some squadron commanders openly mocked Burke's cowboy tactics. A rear admiral wrote a memo arguing that Burke's success was simply luck and shouldn't be used as a basis for changing established procedures. Halsey ignored the memo. He ordered Burke to personally tour the destroyer squadrons in the South Pacific and conduct training. Burke spent 3 weeks flying from squadron to squadron, walking captains through his radar coordination methods, explaining his independent maneuvering principles, drilling crews on emergency turns. Some captains adopted everything immediately. Others resisted. One destroyer captain told Burke directly, "Commander, I've been doing this since 1932. I don't need a chemistry major from Michigan teaching me how to fight." Burke didn't argue. He just handed the captain a stopwatch and challenged him to a drill. Burke's borrowed crew completed the firing exercise in 71 seconds. The captain's experienced crew took 118 seconds. The captain stopped arguing. By February 1944, Burke's tactics were officially adopted as Pacific Fleet doctrine for night surface combat. The first squadrons to use his methods began reporting results. At St. George Channel, his little beavers caught a Japanese tug convoy and destroyed it, even charging through a minefield at 31 knots when shore batteries opened fire. Mines exploded in their wakes, but never under their hulls. Halsey radioed sarcastically, "What are you doing in a Japanese minefield?" Burke replied with one word, 31 knots. Japanese reaction was telling. Within 48 hours of Cape St. George, Imperial Japanese Naval Headquarters issued an unprecedented order. All destroyer convoys in the Solomons must operate with air cover. Japanese destroyers were forbidden from engaging American destroyer forces unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority. The order specifically named Captain Burke as the reason. For the first time in 2 years of Pacific combat, the Imperial Japanese Navy was officially running from American destroyers. In just 3 months, Burke's little beavers fought 22 separate engagements. They sank 1 cruiser, 9 destroyers, 1 submarine, and roughly 30 aircraft. They never lost a ship. They received the Presidential Unit Citation, the only destroyer squadron in World War II to earn that honor. But the Japanese were learning. They were studying Burke's methods. They were reading every American radio intercept they could decode. And in March 1944, Burke would be pulled from his beloved little beavers and given an assignment that would push him into a completely different kind of warfare, one where his destroyer experience would be tested against the most terrifying weapon Japan had ever created. In Part 3, you'll discover why Admiral Mark Mitcher personally requested Burke as his Chief of Staff for Fast Carrier Task Force 58. You'll see how Burke had to learn carrier operations in just 21 days. And you'll witness the moment a Japanese kamikaze slammed into Burke's flagship at 500 miles per hour, killing 390 men around him in seconds. Could 31-knot Burke survive a war fought from the sky? The real war was just beginning. In Part 1, you met Arley Burke, the Colorado farm boy, who became the most aggressive destroyer commander in the Pacific. In Part 2, you watched him sink 3 Japanese destroyers in 32 minutes at Cape St. George, then fight an institutional war against the Navy bureaucracy that wanted his methods buried. By February 1944, his tactics were officially adopted as Pacific Fleet doctrine. The Imperial Japanese Navy issued unprecedented orders forbidding their destroyers from engaging American forces at night. But Burke's war was about to change completely. Because in March 1944, the Japanese unleashed a weapon that didn't care about radar coordination or torpedo geometry. A weapon that turned every American ship into a target the moment it appeared on the horizon. A weapon that would kill more American sailors in the final year of the war than every Japanese destroyer combined. The kamikaze. And Arley Burke was about to find himself on the bridge of the most attacked aircraft carrier in United States Navy history. This was no longer a destroyer war. This was something nobody had ever fought before. The Japanese High Command had a problem they could not solve. By early 1944, American naval power was crushing them on every front. American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant ships at a rate of 200,000 tons per month. American carriers were destroying Japanese aircraft faster than Japan could build them. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American pilots shot down 600 Japanese aircraft in 2 days while losing only 123 of their own. Imperial Naval Headquarters in Tokyo held emergency meetings throughout the summer of 1944. The numbers were catastrophic. Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, 3 battleships, and over 7,000 trained pilots in just 6 months. They could replace the steel. They could not replace the men. Bati. So they made a decision that horrified even some of their own officers. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi formally proposed organized suicide attacks. Pilots would deliberately crash their bomb-laden aircraft into American ships. The math was brutal but simple. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft, 1 American carrier destroyed. The exchange rate in Japanese eyes was acceptable, and the first organized kamikaze attacks began on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The escort carrier, USS St. Lo, was struck by a single zero. She exploded and sank within 30 minutes. 143 American sailors dead from 1 aircraft. The Japanese had found a weapon American radar coordination could not stop. Within 3 months, the kamikaze threat exploded. Over 2,500 Japanese pilots volunteered for suicide missions. They sank 47 American ships and damaged 368 more. American sailors began dying at rates not seen since Pearl Harbor. The Pacific Fleet's casualty lists grew longer every week. But this was only the first crisis Burke would face. In March 1944, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Fast Carrier Task Force 58, made a request that stunned the Pacific Fleet. He wanted Arley Burke as his chief of staff. The choice made no sense on paper. Burke was a destroyer man, a surface warfare officer. He had never served on a carrier. He had never coordinated airstrikes. Mitcher commanded the most powerful naval striking force in human history. 15 fleet carriers, hundreds of escort ships, over 1,000 aircraft. The carrier admirals were furious. Mitcher's own staff openly resented Burke's appointment. Several senior aviators wrote formal protests. One captain told Mitcher directly that putting a destroyer cowboy in charge of carrier operations would get pilots killed. Mitcher ignored them all. When Burke reported aboard the flagship USS Lexington, Mitcher looked him over and said, "Can you do this job?" Burke said, "I can learn." Mitcher said, "You have 21 days. After that, we sail for the Marianas." Burke spent those 21 days in carrier briefing rooms from sunrise to midnight. He studied airstrike coordination, combat air patrol tactics, anti-submarine screening, refueling operations, pilot rescue procedures. He read every after-action report from every carrier engagement of the war. He memorized aircraft capabilities, fuel consumption rates, and weapon loadouts. But the real crisis came when carrier captains began openly questioning his orders. During a planning session, one veteran aviator slammed his fist on the table. "Commander Burke, you don't understand carrier operations. You're going to get my pilots killed." Burke looked at him calmly. "Then teach me. Right now. Show me what I'm missing." Munt. The aviator stopped. Nobody had expected that response. For the next 4 hours, Burke sat with the carrier captains and let them teach him everything they knew. He took notes. He asked questions. He admitted his ignorance and absorbed their expertise. By the end of that meeting, the captains who had wanted him gone were now invested in his success. But the kamikaze attacks were intensifying. American sailors were being burned alive in flight deck infernos. The press was demanding answers. Some politicians blamed Mitcher's tactics. Some blamed Burke. The pressure was crushing. Then came May 11, 1945, off the coast of Okinawa. The day everything changed. USS Bunker Hill was the flagship of Task Force 58. Mark Mitcher was aboard. Arley Burke was aboard. 2,600 sailors and aviators were aboard. The carrier had been at sea for 58 consecutive days, supporting the brutal Okinawa invasion. Crews were exhausted. Combat air patrols were stretched thin. At 10:04 a.m. 2 Japanese Zeros broke through the screen. The first kamikaze came in low and fast, a 500-pound bomb under its wing. The Zero clipped the flight deck antenna and slammed into the rear of the ship at over 300 miles per hour. The bomb detonated. Aviation fuel ignited. Parked aircraft exploded one after another. Within 60 seconds, the rear flight deck was a sheet of fire 300 feet long. 30 seconds later, the second kamikaze hit. This one carried a 550-pound bomb. It crashed into the base of the island superstructure. The bomb penetrated 3 decks before exploding. The blast tore through the ready rooms where pilots were waiting for their next mission. 22 pilots died instantly. Burke and Mitcher were on the flag bridge. The blast knocked Burke to the deck. Smoke filled the bridge. Flames licked up the side of the superstructure. Mitcher was bleeding from a head wound. Sailors around them were screaming. Burke got up, checked Mitcher, started organizing damage control by voice because the radios were dead. The fire raged for 5 hours. Below decks, sailors fought through smoke so thick they had to crawl. Hose teams sprayed seawater on burning aviation fuel. Damage control parties shored up bulkheads to prevent the ship from breaking apart. Wounded men were carried to flooded compartments where corpsmen worked by flashlight. Burke was everywhere. He coordinated with the destroyer screen to provide additional firefighting support. He ordered fuel tanks flooded to prevent further explosions. He arranged for wounded transfer to nearby destroyers. He kept Task Force 58 operational even with its flagship burning. The final death toll was staggering. 390 American sailors and aviators killed. 264 wounded. The flight deck was destroyed. The hangar deck was gutted. Bunker Hill would limp back to Pearl Harbor, then to Bremerton for repairs that would last until after the war ended. But the carrier did not sink. Damage control held. The ship survived because Burke and Mitcher refused to abandon her. But 3 days later, Mitcher transferred his flag to USS Enterprise. On May 14th, another kamikaze hit Enterprise. Mitcher transferred his flag again to USS Randolph. Burke went with him every time. He never left Mitcher's side. The numbers from the Okinawa campaign were brutal. Over 4,900 American sailors killed. 4,800 wounded. 36 American ships sunk. 368 damaged. The kamikaze had become the most lethal anti-ship weapon of the war. But Burke's response was characteristic. He helped develop new defensive tactics that would save thousands of lives. The picket destroyer system was expanded. Combat air patrols were doubled. Anti-aircraft gunnery was reorganized using methods Burke had pioneered with destroyers. By June 1945, kamikaze success rates dropped from 30% hits to under 9%. News of Burke's role at Bunker Hill spread quickly through the fleet. The story that traveled through every wardroom in the Pacific was simple. The destroyer Cowboy had stood on a burning bridge for 5 hours and saved a flagship. The aviators who had once called him an outsider now called him the Admiral's right hand. Pilots who had questioned his orders now flew missions he personally planned. Mitcher's official report praised Burke as the most outstanding officer I have served with in 40 years of naval service. The press picked it up. Newspapers across America ran stories about the destroyer captain who had become the brain behind Fast Carrier Task Force 58. The Saturday Evening Post profiled him. Life magazine ran photographs. The American public learned the name they would soon know forever. Burke was awarded a second Distinguished Service Medal for his role at Okinawa. He was promoted to Commodore, then to Rear Admiral. By the end of the war, He had earned 2 Navy Crosses, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, the Legion of Merit and the Purple Heart. But the strategic impact was far greater than personal recognition. The combination of Burke's defensive innovations and the overall American material superiority began crushing Japanese resistance. From May to August 1945, American forces destroyed over 4,000 Japanese aircraft, including most of the remaining kamikaze force. The Imperial Japanese Navy was reduced to a few damaged cruisers and destroyers hiding in inland seas. Japanese High Command knew the war was lost. Internal memoranda from July 1945 admitted that American naval forces could now operate within sight of the Japanese home islands without effective opposition. The kamikaze gamble had failed. The cost had been catastrophic for both sides, but Japan had run out of pilots, aircraft, and time. When the atomic bombs ended the war in August 1945, Burke was on Mitcher's staff planning the invasion of Japan. That invasion would never happen. But the planning documents Burke helped prepare estimated American casualties at over 1 million if the home islands had to be assaulted. Burke's defensive tactics against kamikazes were a major reason planners believed the invasion was even survivable.
Bue.
The destroyer captain from Boulder, Colorado, had helped end the largest naval war in human history. But what happened to the man who did all this? Most war heroes go home. They write memoirs. They run for office. They cash in on fame. Burke did none of those things. He stayed in the Navy. And in 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower would do something that violated every Navy tradition. He would jump Burke over 92 senior admirals and appoint him Chief of Naval Operations. In Part 4, the final chapter, you'll discover how 31-knot Burke transformed the entire United States Navy during the Cold War. You'll see how he championed the Polaris submarine missile program that still protects America today. You'll learn why 68 modern destroyers carry his name. And you'll witness the final words he spoke to a young ensign in 1991, words that captured everything he had learned in 70 years of service. This story has one last chapter, and almost nobody knows it. In Part 1, you met Arley Burke, the Colorado farm boy who threw out the Navy's tactical manual. In Part 2, you watched him sink 3 Japanese destroyers in 32 minutes at Cape St. George, while fighting an institutional war against admirals who wanted his methods buried. In Part 3, you saw him stand on the burning bridge of USS Bunker Hill as 390 men died around him, then helped defeat the kamikaze threat that was killing American sailors by the thousands.
Baptiste.
By August 1945, the war was over. The Imperial Japanese Navy was destroyed. American forces had won the largest naval war in human history. But what happened to the man who did all this? This story has one final twist that almost nobody knows. Because Arley Burke's greatest battle was not fought against Japanese destroyers. It was not fought against kamikaze pilots. His greatest battle was fought in the years after the war ended, and the cost of that battle would be paid for the rest of his life. Because success sometimes comes with a price tag nobody warns you about. When the war ended, Arley Burke was 43 years old. He had 2 Navy Crosses, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, a reputation as one of the most aggressive combat commanders in American history. He could have retired with full honors. He could have written best-selling memoirs. He could have run for Senate from Colorado and almost certainly won. He did none of those things.
But
he stayed in the Navy. He worked harder than ever. And almost immediately, he found himself fighting a new bureaucratic war that nearly ended his career permanently. In 1949, Burke was assigned to the Navy's General Board during what became known as the Revolt of the Admirals. The newly created Department of Defense wanted to cancel the Navy's supercarrier program and give all strategic bombing missions to the Air Force. Burke believed this would cripple American naval power for generations. He testified before Congress against the cancellation. He provided technical analysis showing why naval aviation remained essential. The Secretary of Defense was furious. Burke's name was struck from the promotion list. He was effectively blacklisted. For 2 years, he watched junior officers promoted past him while his career stagnated. Friends warned him to stay quiet. He refused. Then came Korea. June 1950. North Korean forces invaded South Korea. The Navy needed combat-experienced commanders immediately. Burke's name was restored to the promotion list. He was sent to Korea as a destroyer division commander, then promoted to rear admiral. He served as deputy chief of staff to Admiral C. Turner Joy and helped negotiate the Korean armistice at Panmunjom. But the truly impossible moment came in August 1955. President Dwight Eisenhower needed a new chief of naval operations. The traditional choice would have been a senior 4-star admiral. Eisenhower wanted someone different, someone who would shake up the entire Navy. He looked at the seniority list and made a decision that violated every Navy tradition since 1798. He selected Arley Burke, a 2-star admiral, 92nd in seniority. Burke was promoted directly to 4-star admiral. The 92 senior admirals he jumped over were stunned. Many were furious. Some retired in protest. Eisenhower didn't care. He told reporters simply, "I want a fighter." Burke served as Chief of Naval Operations for 6 years. 3 full terms. Longer than any CNO before or since. During those 6 years, he transformed the United States Navy more profoundly than any peacetime commander in American history. But the medals on his uniform were not his real legacy. His real legacy was the technology he forced into existence over the bitter resistance of every conservative voice in the Pentagon. In 1956, Burke championed the Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missile program. The Air Force opposed it. The Army opposed it. Even some senior Navy admirals opposed it. They said it was technically impossible to launch a nuclear missile from underwater. Burke pushed it through anyway. He gave the program priority over every other Navy budget item. He personally selected Rear Admiral William Rayburn to lead it. The first Polaris missile was successfully launched from USS George Washington on July 20, 1960. Just 4 years after Burke approved the program. It was the fastest major weapons development in American history. Today, 65 years later, American submarines still patrol the world's oceans, carrying the direct descendants of that missile. The Trident 2D5 missile currently deployed on Ohio-class submarines traces its complete lineage back to the program Burke saved. These submarines carry approximately 70% of America's nuclear deterrent. They have prevented nuclear war for 6 decades. Burke also championed the nuclear submarine program led by Admiral Hyman Rickover. He modernized the surface fleet with guided missile cruisers and destroyers. He pushed for the Naval Tactical Data System, the first computerized command and control network in any Navy. Every modern naval combat system in the world today traces back to systems Burke approved between 1955 and 1961. The numbers are staggering. Burke's 6 years as CNO produced over 200 major technology programs. The Navy he left behind in 1961 was unrecognizable from the Navy he inherited in 1955. Most importantly, the strategic deterrent he created prevented World War III. But the deeper lesson here is not about technology. The deeper lesson is about a system that almost rejected him at every single step. Think about the pattern of Arley Burke's career. As a young officer, he was told ordnance engineering was a career dead end. He proved them wrong. As a destroyer captain, he was told his tactical innovations were insane. He sank 3 Japanese destroyers in 32 minutes and proved them wrong. As a chief of staff, he was told he could not learn carrier operations in 21 days. He helped run the most powerful naval force in history and proved them wrong. As a junior admiral, he was told testifying against the defense secretary would end his career. He became chief of naval operations and proved them wrong. Every step of his life, the institution tried to stop him. Every step, he found a way through. History is full of similar stories that almost did not happen. Hyman Rickover faced 35 years of opposition before nuclear submarines were accepted. The Manhattan Project was nearly canceled 3 times. The radar that won the Battle of Britain was developed by a meteorologist named Robert Watson Watt, who was originally trying to detect lightning. And the pattern is always the same. Innovation comes from people willing to be told they are wrong and willing to keep working anyway. In modern terms, this is the same battle fought today by entrepreneurs against established corporations, by junior researchers against academic gatekeepers, by reformers against political machines. The institution always defends what exists. The innovator always has to fight harder than seems reasonable. Burke understood something most people never accept. The system is not designed to recognize good ideas. The system is designed to perpetuate itself. If you have a better way to do something, the system will fight you. Not because the system is evil, but because the system cannot tell the difference between dangerous chaos and necessary evolution. Your job is to prove the difference through results, the way Burke proved it, with stopwatches, with after-action reports, with 3 Japanese destroyers on the bottom of the Pacific. But there is one final detail almost nobody knows. In 1991, the United States Navy commissioned a new class of guided missile destroyer. The lead ship was named USS Arley Burke. The 90-year-old admiral, now using a wheelchair, attended the commissioning ceremony in Norfolk, Virginia. His wife, Roberta, was beside him. They had been married 68 years. What most people do not know is that Burke personally insisted on a specific design philosophy for the entire ship class. He demanded the ships be built to operate aggressively, take damage, and keep fighting. He insisted on raw combat capability over comfort or efficiency. The Navy listened. Today, 35 years later, the Arley Burke class is the longest-running destroyer production program in United States naval history. 73 ships have been commissioned. More are being built. They serve in every major fleet operation around the world. Every single one carries his nickname inscribed on the hull. 31, not Burke. But here is the detail that almost nobody knows. At that 1991 commissioning ceremony, a young ensign approached Burke nervously and asked the elderly admiral one question. "Admiral, what should I remember about command?" Burke looked at the young officer. His voice was weak with age, but his eyes were still the eyes of the man who had stood on the bridge at Cape St. George. "When you have contact with the enemy, close fast and hit hard. Don't give them time to think. If you're moving at 31 knots, they can't catch you." The ensign wrote it down. Burke smiled. Some men, they say, never stop being who they were at their best moment. Arley Burke died on January 1, 1996. He was 94 years old. President Bill Clinton attended his funeral. He was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, where he had graduated 73 years earlier. His grave is simple, a small white headstone. His wife Roberta was buried beside him in July 1997. There is no grand monument, but every time an Arley Burke-class destroyer puts to sea, the nickname goes with it. Every time a young officer learns the story of Cape St. George, Burke's tactics live again. Every time a Trident missile patrol leaves Port, Burke's strategic vision protects America for one more day. From a Colorado farm boy who took apart tractors to understand how they worked to the man who reshaped the most powerful navy in human history. Arley Burke proved that one person willing to think faster than the system around him can change the course of nations. The numbers tell part of the story. 3 Japanese destroyers sunk in 32 minutes, 22 consecutive engagements without losing a ship. 390 men saved from a burning carrier. 200 weapons programs approved as CNO. 73 destroyers bearing his name. 6 decades of nuclear deterrence built on technology he championed. But the real story is not in the numbers. The real story is in one moment, on one bridge, on one dark night in November 1943, when a 42-year-old commander chose to chase a faster enemy at the absolute limit of his squadron's speed. Because doctrine said it was impossible. Because everyone told him to wait. Because his sailors trusted him to do it anyway. If you know a story like this, share it in the comments. There are hundreds of forgotten innovators from World War II whose names deserve to be remembered. Subscribe for more historical stories that almost nobody tells anymore. Because some men move at 31 knots their entire lives, and the rest of the world spends a lifetime trying to catch up.